German prosecutors are seeking the arrest of a suspect over the sabotage of the Nord Stream gas pipelines 2 years ago. A Ukrainian man who was living in Poland is accused of being one of the divers who planted the explosive devices. Polish prosecutors have confirmed they've received the German arrest warrant. 4 explosions were registered on the Nord Stream pipelines under the Baltic Sea in September 2022, months after the start of Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine. The pipelines were built to bring Russian gas into Europe via Germany, but weren't in operation at the time. Benjamin Schmitt is a senior fellow at the University of Pennsylvania's Kleinman Center for Energy Policy. He's testified to the US Congress on Russia's weaponization of energy and warned of the dangers of Russian sabotage of those pipelines. Welcome back to DW, Ben. What do you make of this arrest warrant issued for a Ukrainian citizen?
Well, look, great to be here, Phil. And I was just telling the producer before coming on, you were the first person to ask me that officially. Did I think this was sabotage on the day that Nord Stream blew up in 2022? You asked me that question, and I stand by the fact that, yes, it is sabotage, certainly. And now we're way further along in this story. And I think that, it's interesting to point out that today we've seen the first arrest warrant for a suspect in this sabotage, and the fact that it is a Ukrainian citizen really doesn't tell us anything new based on what we saw in the reporting from the press thus far. It's been surmised that a quote-unquote pro-Ukrainian team of divers sailed out in this sailboat, the Andromeda, and allegedly blew up Nord Stream 2 by planting explosive devices on the pipes. However, the context in which that reporting comes out is really, really key here. And what I mean by that is we have seen the Russian Federation, and in particular reports that Russia's military intelligence, the GRU, has been hiring Ukrainian citizens, Belarusian citizens, Polish citizens, etc., across the EU to carry out some of its sabotage operations that we've seen. We've seen specific reports in both Poland and the Czech Republic of this sort of dynamic going on. Russian intelligence hiring citizens from non-Russian countries and then having them help carry out these sort of sabotage operations. So I'm really not surprised. And so what I want to do is say, the context of thinking about this is really, really key. Jörg Schmitt from the Süddeutsche Zeitung spoke with you the last half hour. I watched the interview. I applaud his reporting, but at the same time, I want to remind the viewers of the context when we say, we hear her statements like we heard last half hour that all fingers point to Ukraine now. That does not equal the Ukrainian state. As he has said himself, there's no evidence that the Ukrainian state or the Ukrainian military was behind this. So that's really, really key in remembering, the details of this story.
And how does Russia benefit from sabotaging a pipeline that would bring its gas to Europe, making it lots of money?
Look, there's a number of reasons why Russia would have motivation to do this, as I said from the outset. And look, I've been doing a year-and-a-half-long research project through the Kleinman Center for Energy Policy at the University of Pennsylvania. A final report will be coming out soon on this front that looks at the technical feasibility of what's being described, not just the criminal investigation, but the technical feasibility and what we see from open source intelligence. And what we see and what we have seen reported is that large numbers of Russian seabed warfare capable vessels that are specifically designed to do sort of seabed explosives and sabotage operations were at the Nord Stream sites, at the blast sites themselves multiple times before the explosions, including 2 days before the explosion in one of the cases. So the idea is that, okay, did this sailboat exist? Yes. I went to Warnemünde in the port of Hohe Duna in Germany. I saw the sailboat. It exists. Check. It's a rental sailboat. So that explains how investigators may have known where the sailboat went. But whether it or not it itself carried out this operation is with no support. That's a major, major question mark, and a major question mark in the investigation. And I think that we need to continue to remember that launching a sabotage operation from a sailboat as the platform is really, really difficult. Even though you might have someone who knows how to do diving, right? It's something that, the Russians had capabilities on site from their military that can carry out this sort of operation. So why would they do it? Okay, look, number one, Russia was already cutting off gas, and again, this is the context, already cutting off gas through Nord Stream 1 over that summer. They made false technical claims claiming that sanctions needed to be lifted in Canada to send Siemens turbines to get Nord Stream 1 operational again. The German government put pressure with help from the United States to pressure Canada to get its sanctions lifted and get those Siemens turbines back. But with no gas flowing, and these turbines were basically a red herring, they faced significant penalties from off-takers downstream in Europe. And I think that part of this could be a motivation by Gazprom to have an ability to declare force majeure on the pipeline. At the same time, this was right before Russia started its large-scale kinetic strikes against Ukrainian energy infrastructure. And by that virtue of looking at it in this manner, one can see that if Russia was to blow up Nord Stream 2 and Nord Stream 1, pipelines that, of course, were not operational at the time, it would further signal and put pressure on governments like Berlin to say, look, the only other gas route, and I know we're going to get to this in a second, the only other gas route is through Ukraine. And guess how? We can reach out and touch those gas pipelines with kinetic strikes at ease during this military conflict as it's illegally invading Ukraine.
Okay, so in energy security terms, this was a massive wake-up call for Europe and I suppose the world as well, just in terms of how vulnerable we can be.
Absolutely. We've seen a spike in the number of sabotage incidents across Europe against critical infrastructure. In fact, we saw one of these just in a few weeks before Russia's large-scale invasion of Ukraine. A Russian fishing vessel crossed over the Svalsat fiber optic cable near the North Pole in the Arctic Ocean a number of times, and then you saw this cable get cut. You've, of course, seen reports of the Baltic Connector pipeline and also cables in the Gulf of Finland getting cut by allegedly a Chinese-owned vessel, but of course it was being escorted by a Russian icebreaker. And then, of course, we've seen a number of sabotage incidents, including today in Germany, not only over the past several months against rail infrastructure and things like this, but just today, 2 military bases were shut down because of reports of basically a water poisoning attack against water treatment facilities around Cologne, Germany. And that's incredibly dangerous. And again, something that we need to look at not only for energy security reasons against infrastructure, but for national security reasons as well.
Let's turn to Ukraine's incursion into Russia's Kursk region. Kiev is now claiming control of Süddeutsche, which is a major transit point for Russian gas. How big a deal is that?
I think it's a big deal, not only the symbolic resonance of this incursion into Kursk in general, but from an energy security standpoint, the fact that the very location where the Ukrainian gas transmission system gets a lion's share of its gas is now under Ukrainian control inside the Russian Federation. So there's pictures of Ukrainian troops occupying the Gazprom facility on that side of the border, which you can see to the left here. And look, what we're seeing is another reason that this gas transit has to end, this sort of agreement where Russian gas is still getting to Europe via Ukraine or by any measure through other channels, that needs to end. And I think the Ukrainians are clear-eyed about this, the need to end that transit contract. The transit contract is due to be up at the end of this year. Of course, the last one was signed in harrowing terms at the end of 2019, and we're up at the 5-year mark now, and we've talked to the audience again about this in the past. But again, we have to remind people, and especially German politicians that are girding for a return to business as usual with Putin's regime on energy. There can be no return to business as usual with the Putin regime. It is simply too dangerous. And all of the folks that supported these projects in the past, they have to remember, this is embarrassing, this was dangerous conduct, and it's time to move on. The era for Gazprom in Europe is over. It is over from a policy standpoint, security standpoint. It's got to end.
Just on that point, it's hard to tell which is more peculiar after 2 years of Russia's war against Ukraine. The fact that Ukraine is still allowing Russian gas to flow through its territory, or the fact that the EU is still buying Russian gas.
that's a race to the bottom, Phil. I don't want to allege which is more peculiar. They're both really, really sad, frankly. But the Ukrainians, to their credit, are following through with the agreement that they signed with the Russian Federation in 2019. Certainly nothing that the Russian Federation has done in return has stood up to its agreements, and it's launched an illegal invasion of Ukraine. But yeah, the EU is still buying some Russian gas. The Ukrainians are still transiting that gas. I think the Ukrainians know that has to end. But of course, the EU has to be ready to go and say that it's over with the Putin regime, not with the concept of Russia in general, but the dependence and the import of Russian energy has to end. And that includes with LNG from Arctic 2 LNG, by the way, not just pipelines.
OK. Thanks for talking us through that as clearly and eloquently as ever. Energy security expert Benjamin Schmitt from the University of Pennsylvania's Kleinman Center. DW's chief political correspondent Nina Haase told us more about the suspect.
We're talking about a Ukrainian man whose name is given to us as Volodymyr Z only. According to German privacy rules, we don't get the last name, and whose last address was in Poland. So German investigators believe that he was one of the divers who planted explosive devices on the Nord Stream pipelines. That arrest warrant has not been executed so far, though, because he's said to have already left Poland for Ukraine, because, and I quote, the Polish authorities, Germany failed to include his name in a database of wanted persons. That's what Reuters are reporting. So we're also hearing that German investigators have also identified 2 more Ukrainians, but there is no arrest warrant for these people yet.
What more do we know about them? German media are reporting that there are 2 more suspects, if I'm not mistaken.
2 more suspects, 2 Ukrainians, a man and a woman, and German investigators believe that they could have acted as divers in those attacks. No arrest warrants for them yet. Now, we all remember the reports that 2 years ago there was a German yacht that was sailing in that area, the German yacht named Andromeda, and it is well plausible, say those media reports now, that those people have then actually dived and planted those explosives on those pipelines. It's very important to note in this context, though, that none of this has been confirmed by the German prosecutors so far. We have the information from the Polish authorities, but not from the German ones. They've declined to comment.
So this attack dates back to 2022. Besides that yacht that you just mentioned, what have we learned in the meantime about how this group of people presumably was able to carry out an attack on the pipelines?
Now, Germany, Denmark and Sweden all opened investigations into the incident at the time, and the Swedish investigators found traces of explosives on several objects that they recovered from the explosion site, which then led the Swedes to confirm that the blasts were in fact deliberate acts, so acts of sabotage. And in January last year, Germany raided a ship that may have been used to transport explosives, and Germany then told the United Nations that it believed that trained divers could have attached devices to the pipelines at a depth of about 70 to 80 meters. But so far, there had been no result as far as suspects go. Lots of accusations from Russia that were rejected by the countries accused. Lots of conspiracy theories too. And Denmark and Sweden then closed the investigations earlier this year with no result as far as suspects go. But the investigations continued in Germany.
Can you give us a sense of how important the Nord Stream pipelines were for Germany and Europe in terms of energy security?
Now, it's a significant development in this story, Nicole. Just remember that 2 years ago, Russia launches its full-scale invasion in February. European countries impose sanctions on Russia because of that. Russia cuts gas supplies in response. And then in September, the pipelines are sabotaged and we see those explosions. So the Nord Stream pipelines and those explosions were at the center of geopolitical tensions between Russia and Ukraine and its supporters on the other side then. And since then, there has been lots of speculation investigation, lots of conspiracy theories, as I said, but the case had in a way run cold, and now we've got this. But again, it's worth noting that the German Federal Prosecution Service has not confirmed any of it, but on Wednesday, the government spokesperson said it's high priority to shed light on this story, that it is a matter for the prosecution and that it doesn't have any negative implications on Germany's relationship with Kyiv or change the fact that Russia is still waging war on Ukraine.
That's DW's Nina Haase. Brilliant speaking to you. Many thanks.
Our chief political correspondent, Nina Haase. Well, Jörg Schmitt is one of the journalists who worked on this story. He's head of investigations at Germany's Süddeutsche Zeitung newspaper. Welcome to DW. Danish and Swedish authorities closed this case at the start of the year. How did the German prosecutor find out more?
Yeah, it looks like that they have received an intel information from another domestic intelligence service, which tipped them on three names, three divers that should have been involved in the sabotage in the Baltic Sea. And the rest was more or less a kind of lucky punch. German investigators already had a radar photo taken in the night of the 8th of September at the island of Rügen, and they photographed people driving too fast in a white van and could identify them as well as an Ukraine van. And then they made, good criminal work, the investigators, and they asked the driver of the car if he knew this man, which, was already known for them as from the intelligence services. And this driver could identify that person, this Vladimir Zed, and this guy was also on this radar picture taken at Rügen. So the German general prosecutor in Karlsruhe said that he had enough evidence to, go after this suspect and to write an arrest warning.
OK, this all sounds very James Bond. Who do you think this Vladimir Zed was working for?
Well, that's a good question. We don't have not found any link to, let's say, Ukraine state or Ukraine military. But of course, such a guy which has a deeply background in diving and especially as a specialist in deep diving could, of course, not do this, all operation by its own. So he needed logistic support. He needed knowledge about how to, create or work with explosive stuff. And therefore, we deeply believe that he had some help from, maybe military background guys, maybe semi-military guys, but, all the fingers point now at Ukraine.
OK. So while you were launching this investigation, while you were looking into it, tell us about what happened to your sources.
Well, I think it has been the worst investigation in my lifetime as a journalist and as an investigative journalist, which takes more than 30 years now. Because no one really wanted to speak to us. There was absolutely closed doors at investigators, as prosecutors' offices. And we tried it with international corporations, and also there all the docks were closed. There was a kind of witch hunt for some time after our sources that we had. So, it was very hard to dig into that story during the last 3 years.
And do you think this was because, if you're right and Ukraine was somehow involved in this, then clearly nobody wants that to come out at the moment? Is that your thinking?
This is my personal opinion. My personal opinion is that no one is really interested in, finalizing that story. You have to see, on one hand, we have this massive support of Ukraine here in Germany. So, having the idea that one of our allies there has bombed our energy infrastructure is not a nice picture, and especially would really be a drop of water to those people who wanted to stop the support of Ukraine on one hand. And on the other hand, we know and have learned that the Polish role is, well, let's say, more than difficult. And if it would come up that finally Poland would have helped or would have tipped Vladimir said to leave Poland to Ukraine and to escape before the arrest could take place, then of course we would talk about a big political scandal, and that would really cool down the connections between Germany and Poland.
OK, so if you're right, and this is somehow linked to Ukraine, and nobody wants, and no friendly government to Ukraine wants this to get out, what do you expect to happen if and when Germany's arrest warrant for this guy is actually served? Do you actually think that it will be served?
Well, if this guy is in Ukraine and return to Ukraine, I think there's no real handling at the moment for German authorities to pick him. Of course, they could try to do a request to Kiev and ask them to assist and find this guy, but I'm pretty sure that that would not happen.
Good talking to you. Thanks for talking to us. Jörg Schmitt, Head of Investigations at Germany's Süddeutsche Zeitung newspaper.